The Isles! The Isles! A wonderful place! Good for a visit, or for an eternity.
It is only natural, when gazing up into the unpolluted night sky, for the vastness of the cosmos to fill you with a sudden and overwhelming sense of insignificance. As your eyes adjust to the scale of it all, the celestial congregation grows. The burning trails of countless children of Aetherius flare and flicker with renewed vigour. The dawn-era dispersion reveals the inconceivable number of spirits in attendance, long ago at convention atop the adamantine tower. Somewhere beyond our perception, draped across the mundus like swaddling cloth, the lunar lattice staunches the flow of the terrors that exist beyond. You may attribute this to Akatosh's covenant, in which he gathered the tangled skeins of oblivion and knit them fast with the bloody sinews of his heart, to hold fast the gates of oblivion. Or perhaps it was Azura's doing, for she is the keeper of all gates and keys, all rims and thresholds, and holds dominion over the lunar lattice and the motions of the moons, dead Lorkhan's cloven duality. It is, according to the prophet Maruk, forbidden to traffic with demons, with Daedra, and all the denizens of the dimensions of oblivion are to be considered demons. This is because Maruk believed in the singular supremacy of Shazar Lorkhan, as opposed to the two-faced Akatosh, for Shazar was the true god of the Empire, and the true guardian of the Mundus. To travel beyond the barrier is to deny his divine protection. Were Maruk alive today, he would be ashamed of my research. He would slam the door to the Mundus on me, leaving me stranded in Sheogorath's Shivering Isles. Thankfully, Maruk is not alive, nor his dogmatic Elysian order, so I am free to ramble the winding roads of the asylum in peace. Though I hope my audience with Sheogorath happens soon, for there is something so much more unsettling about the skies here. There is no lattice, no safeguard from the roiling, chaotic energies that penetrate every fathom of oblivion. While I await my chance to talk to the sovereign of the asylum, I want to explore an obvious, yet remarkably complex question. What is a plane of oblivion? And in delving into this topic, we may come to understand just how unique the Shivering Isles are when compared to the manifold realms of the Demon Lords. Now, I know on this channel we have a tendency to plunge into the stinking depths of Elder Scrolls lore. Sometimes the only way to process these topics is to have a long, introspective shower and think about what we've done. Even then, the cacophony of unreliable sources, non-canon texts, and my frivolously flowery prose leaves a lingering taint. As early as the 6th century BC, the Greeks believed in the geocentric model of astronomy, that the universe revolves around Earth. And given their level of technology, it's understandable. One philosopher, named Anaximander, asserted that the sun, moon, and planets were holes in invisible wheels surrounding Earth. Through the holes, humans could see concealed fire. Sounds strangely similar to the stories of Magnus and the Magna Ge, doesn't it? Since then, humanity's understanding of its place in the universe has evolved. But we're not interested in fictional worlds like Earth, populated by Greeks, Gauls, Goths, and a menagerie of other curious civilizations. We care about Tamriel, Nirn, the Mundus, and what lies beyond. Just as the humans of Earth have a history of adapting the way they perceive the cosmos, so do we. Oblivion is simultaneously disconnected from the Mundus, while also being a fundamental part of Anu and Padamai's creation, the Orbic Wheel. If we imagine the Orbis like a wheel, then the gaps between the plane planets of the Aedra are filled with dark chasms of oblivion. And where the original spirits who did not take part in creation chose to create their realms, those are the plane planets of the princes. The Aedra who did not flee from the limitation of creation became the Earthbones, the scaffolds of the mortal realm. They brought laws like time and physics. The rules they solidified are about as rigid as anything in the Orbis can be. That is why they are portrayed as spokes, securing the Mundus in its place at the centre of the wheel. far from Aetherius, yet connected to it by the spokes of the Aedra. Thanks to the cowardice of Magnus, among other factors, raw magicka leaks into the realm from the sun and stars. If channeled by the inhabitants of the mortal realm, this raw ethereal energy allows for creativity, for variation, for unexpected twists in the dragon's time-bound tale. But Lorkhan's limitation does keep the mortal realm in check for the most part. In Oblivion, however, none of these rules apply. The sacrifices made by the Earthbones solidified the Mundus, but these gods don't have jurisdiction over the outer realms. One way to look at the mortal realm is like a plane of Oblivion. Mankar Cameron asserted this very idea, suggesting that the realm's prince was Lorkhan, only it was usurped by the Eight. I'll avoid delving too deep into Cameron's conspiracies for now, but we know that all these gods had their powers limited by the strictures of the Mundus. In Oblivion, however, the rulers of each plane are unrestricted. They can tailor every aspect of their realm to suit their whims and fancies. We are so used to living in a realm with discrete, detached, or even dead gods, that it's hard to imagine what it would be like to live in a place that is constantly being altered by an omnipotent force. Strangely though, despite their unbridled power, these spirits are flawed. They can be deceived, they can make mistakes. Hell, they can even lose control over their own domains. Clavicus Vile shares his divinity with his dog, and had yet more of it stolen by a scheming sentient sword. He failed to track down the shadow of Umbra right beneath his nose in the Fields of Regret. Mephala had a ring stolen from her leg by a cunning Khajiit while she was distracted. The list goes on. It's rarely talked about anymore, but the Empire and the Dominion once had an interest in interplanetary travel. There are mentions of imperial ethereal expeditions, as well as the legendary sunbirds of Alinor. Orreries and observatories can still be found across Tamriel, and the Empire even established an academy in the Void to train prospective battle mages. This battle spire is said to be the fortress of all fortresses that encompasses the entirety of a realm, with ramparts that tower over the edges of Oblivion. But these parts of history have been neglected, largely due to the magicka cost, as well as the abundance of war and apocalyptic events ravaging the continent. There was the Warp in the West, the Oblivion Crisis, the Red Year, the Great War. The powers of Tamriel have been so focused on their borders that they haven't had the time, nor peace, to look up. But the Pocket Guide to the Empire 3rd edition, written just before Dagon's invasion, lays out the imperial understanding of the cosmos, and of the planes of Oblivion. The first chapter begins by stating, "As vast as Tamriel is, we are only but one small part of the greater world of Nirn. It is a physical place, but a spiritual one as well, comprising what teachers of mysticism call the Mundus, or more delightfully, the Grey Maybe." And this quote is crucial, because while we may try to understand Oblivion by comparing it to a solar system, with plain planets occupying places in the empty vastness of space, these realms are not easily defined. They aren't structured in a measurable way as cartographers might chart the seas and landmasses of Nirn. They are spiritual in nature, and malleable depending on the ruler. Such is the privilege of not getting involved in Lorkhan's limitation. Part of why this topic is so daunting to discuss is because, outside of Nirn and the Earthbones and the Divines, it's really difficult to define anything at all. Even the sun and stars, the rifts left in the fabric of the Mundus by the fleeing sun god and his star orphans, aren't necessarily as simple as mere holes. The Bosma spinner Gurnelin describes their dance across the firmament. As Oblivion is a realm composed of realms, so too is Aetherius a bright sea with many realms within. Each of these stars is a window into these realms, and as these realms move, so too do they move, or close, like doors. Stars are simultaneously rents between Mundus and Aetherius, while also being free to move on their axes and twinkle with their own incandescent light. I guess what I'm trying to say is, there's good reason why the original spirits were so offended by the limits Lorkhan wanted to put in place when creating the mortal realm. The interplay of Anu and Padamai was profoundly complex. The spirits were confused and formless. So, the further we stray from the constancy of the Mundus, the more nebulous everything becomes. This is also why we often hear the metaphor, the Waters of Oblivion. Water shifts and flows. To make anything of it, you need to freeze it. Rather than feeling frustration at the formlessness, embrace the chaos and go with the flow. The Pocket Guide goes on to say the following about the Void of Oblivion. Simply staring into the night sky is enough to visit Oblivion, for it begins where Mundus ends, and surrounds those terminals on every side. Its rulers are the immortal princes of Void, whose names are many and whose natures are inextricably tied to our own. In the same way mortals are infused with the 9 divines and other ethereal spirits through virtue and creation, we also share a relationship with the royalty of our baser vagaries. Here the Pocket Guide suggests ideas we usually wouldn't expect from imperial adherents to the religion of the divines. To assert that the Daedra Lords have any relation to mortals is something you'd hear from the Dunmer, or the Khajiit, or even perhaps the Nords. It is a Padamaic notion. Ultima spirituality and the cosmopolitan imperial pantheon generally denounce the Daedra, the demons. But as the Pocket Guide proceeds to say, we are not so disconnected from Oblivion as we may think. The security of the lattice and the mortal realm is not perfect, and we've seen time and time again that the barriers can be broken. The Pocket Guide states, since Oblivion is coterminous with the plane of Nirn, travel there has happened since time immemorial. Because of this, its quarters are the most mapped and charted of all the outer realms, though there is still much more mystery than understanding. While it is easiest to think of a void being exactly that, Oblivion is anything but, and while it is true that much of it is a black and empty sea, through every era magicians and emperors and villains have all visited its borders, and returned with tales of countless isles of wonder and cosmic whimsy. The Daedra Lords, here from the start, have through long eons hoarded so much surplus of existence that they have built not only their own domains, but much more besides. Most of Tamriel's observatories are no longer in use. The Empire still has its Imperial Battle Spire, though reinvestment into the Void Castle has been deemed unfeasible since the destruction wrought by Dagon. But as I mentioned before, travel beyond the confines of Nirn has become less common. Reaching the domains of the Daedra Lords generally requires a portal, or a formal invitation. According to the Pocket Guide, trying to access them directly from Nirn, reaching magic by magicka, requires untenable arcane expenditure. There is a theory called the parabolic Kalpa, which is yet another rabbit hole for a future video. But in essence, it demonstrates how magical the Mundus is during its life cycle. The dawn is a time of myth as reality. Gods walk the realm. They forge alliances and wage wars. They create new peoples and religions. It serves as the foundation for the more physically and magically limited eras that follow. The idea is that as the Kalpa reaches the end of its life cycle, it loops back around into the dawn. Therefore, if you imagine the Kalpa as a capital U, the top is the dawn, where magicka and myth are unfettered. Then, as you travel down the shape, through the Malefic, first, second, third and fourth eras, these divine forces weaken, or more accurately, mortal understanding of these divine forces weaken. Then, the theory holds that this understanding, and the presence of these forces, will ramp up again as the Kalpa draws to a close. In the Fourth Era, there seems to be an unprecedented level of ignorance. The Oblivion Crisis led to increased intolerance regarding Daedra worship, and even the study of dark arts like conjuration. This is a drastic change from an empire that once utilized real estate in the Void to train battle mages. And in Skyrim, the Great Collapse led to a distrust of magic, which, once again, is a stark contrast to a culture that once considered their clever men to be essential for both divination and warfare. When wandering the wilds of Skyrim, one can't help but feel a sense of loss and loneliness, surrounded by the ruins of greater civilizations. The Nords are a shadow of their former First Era glory. and Dwemer crafts remain utterly unparalleled and inimitable even after thousands of years. Pursuing the arts of conjuration and daedrology are more taboo than ever, which is why it's our duty to continue. The peoples of Tamriel have reached a state of obliviousness that keeps us from understanding the true nature of oblivion. When asked about the law of time in the Shivering Isles, Haskill had this to say: "Inhabitants of the Shivering Isles are affected by time, but we are not subject to it. We are subjects of Lord Sheogorath, who subjects us to whatever subjects he is in the mood to subjudicate. Because time is subjective. And this is exactly why we can't construct orreries that include the plain planets of the princes. The Divines solidified their efforts to stabilise Nirn, and they can therefore be charted and placed on star maps. Even then, I'm still sceptical as to how rigid a god can truly become, even after Lorkhan's trap. But as Haskill suggested, the realms that exist beyond Mundus's strictures are subjective. They can be moved and moulded on a Daedra Lord's whim. This is more normal than the well-defined divine planets of Mundus. In truth, the notion of gods being well-defined was never the case before Lorkhan's grand, mundane scheme. As stated in the monomyth, at first the Orbis was turbulent and confusing, as Anwiel's ruminations went on without design. Aspects of the Orbis then asked for a schedule to follow, or procedures whereby they might enjoy themselves a little longer outside of perfect knowledge. So that he might know himself this way too, Anu created Auriel, the soul of his soul. Auriel bled through the Orbis as a new force called time. With time, various aspects of the Orbis began to understand their natures and limitations. This goes to show how essential the force of time was for all the space within creation to make sense. Astrophysics is far from my area of expertise. As a daedrologist, I prefer the more nebulous, fantastical concepts of the Orbis. Simply put, without time, there are 3 dimensions of space. Time is that crucial 4th dimension, and this is why Lorkhan made a promise to Auriel that he would be the king of this new realm of Mundus. Because the House of Sithis, of limitation, could not be so limited without Auriel's sphere bringing order. As for the Daedra, they acknowledge time, but aren't tied to it in the same restrictive way. Their realms are fueled by chaotic creatia, which is unformed patamaic chaos, and all clocks would melt in the presence of such an entropic force. You will find this creatia in every realm, and it gives form to the lesser Daedric beings that inhabit every realm. If a plane of oblivion is subjective, and an extension of the Atada that governs it, then we can see a reflection of every prince within their respective realm. This reflection manifests in the form of its inhabitants, as well as its geography. Meridia is a good example, because there are ancient manuscripts telling of her realm's formation. She was of the Magna Gi, the ether-forged children of the sun god, and she created her plane in defiance of her father, altering her trajectory like a shooting star through oblivion. The Nibonese scholar, Thrastus of Elenir, studied an old Aeliad text detailing Meridia's celestial emancipation. And while the manuscript employs Aeliadune phrases in a late Nedic syntax, some segments have been translated and interpreted. The text is titled The Exegesis of Meridnunda, and an excerpt reads, "They were known as the 9 coruscations, who followed the parabolas that led away from Magnus. Meridnunda was of these sisters. The lords of the Chaos Realms chided Meridnunda for her trespass, and bade her return to Orbis, claiming all existing spheres as their own. But Meridnunda formed of her substance a great drag lens, and the light of Magnus was bent thereby. The rays carved, focused a new sphere from the chaos, which Meridnunda, laughing, sparkling, did claim for her own. Thus does Meridnunda slide across the rainbow road from end to end, at one end stretching the dragon, at the other end compressing him. In simpler terms, Meridia, along with a few other star orphans, shot across the sky on their own divergent arcs. Instead of breaching the barrier to Aetherius, becoming a star, she landed within the orbic wheel, in the Waters of Oblivion. The other Daedra lords did not welcome her arrival, for she reeked of Aetherius. She stole some of Magnus's light, which was on a direct path to Aetherius, and she bent it, focusing them onto a patch of Padamaic chaos, forging a realm of dazzling Anuic luminosity where it did not belong. By stretching and compressing the dragon, she cemented her realm's place in time-space, making it fit, making it eternally present, even though it had been previously absent. And this makes perfect sense if we refer back to the monomyth. Meridia was no longer working on Auriel's rigid schedule. The dragon was more malleable here beyond Nirn's liminal barrier. From the circumstances of the plane's creation alone, we can see a reflection of the prince who governs it. The coloured rooms shine with subordination. She achieved her ambition in spite of her Daedric neighbours, just as she had disobeyed her father Magnus's demands. The Glister Witch is greedy and defiant, and her radiance is only enhanced by her detractors. Their ire is fuel to her fire. And Meridia's primary servants are the Aurorans, who emerge from her omnicolour creatia as beatific warriors. They shine like soldiers of heaven, yet they are Daedric in nature, do not be fooled. Their gleaming golden plate can cast any imaginable hue. Other forms of Daedra, like the Dremora, tend to view the Aurorans as exhibiting pretensions beyond their worth, all lustre with no substance beneath it, which, as with everything we've mentioned so far, seems to fit the general perception of their master, the Glister Witch Meridia. You can learn a lot about a prince from their realm and the Daedra that serve them. An example that strays from the normal Daedric Prince to lesser Daedra dynamic is Boethiah. I won't talk about her in too much detail, as I'll be exploring his lore in a dedicated video soon, but I've theorised in the past that Boethiah loved Lorkhan, and saw the beauty in the trickster's creation. Her sphere includes deceit and proving oneself against all odds. Her affinity for Lorkhan can be seen in her sigil of the coiled serpent. It can be seen in her deeds, punishing Trinimac and creating the Padamaic Kaima Dunma people. And if some extra canon sources are to be believed, her realm embodies this love as well. Her plane is most commonly known as Attribution Share, which is a name that implies communal control and responsibility for the realm. Mankar Cameron asserted that the mortal realm is merely a plane of oblivion belonging to Lorkhan, which he shared with his 8 apostles before his betrayal. In an out-of-lore post, Michael Kirkbride, who wrote this very theory, says this about Mankar's claims, and about Boethiah's realm. Imagine the Oblivion realm of Attribution Share, for example, with 8 powerful Daedra, one of which is Boethiah, wielding divine power over their realm, and all their subjects bound to the whims of that power. Now, imagine it under an eartheology and creation myth as complicated as anything on Tamriel, where the myriad mortals of Nirn were, to the denizens of the 8 divines of Attribution Share, in fact, Daedra. This realm would be surrounded by the void, just like Tamriel, in turn surrounded by Aetherius. And who's to say that the big hole known as the sun doesn't hit their shores as well? Lorkhan the Padamaic could be exactly what the Mankar says he is, the dead lord of a lost Daedric realm, whose gods are powerful liars. Now, as I said, this is not a canon source, but Mankar Cameron's assertions, written by the same developer, are canon. It's reasonable to see some validity in the post, as it's an extension of a canon idea, and fits Boethiah's sphere perfectly. The Prince of Plot doesn't fear usurpers. She is secure in her knowledge that Snakemount belongs to her, and any being capable of challenging that security is a worthy adversary indeed. Can you think of a better way for the sphere of deception, betrayal, murder and insurrection to manifest than through a realm where 8 powerful entities are in constant cutthroat competition with one another? It's just another Mundus without the grand lie of virtue, espoused by followers of the divines. We mentioned Trinimac's humiliation at the hands of Boethiah, and this newly excreted prince's plane of oblivion is the topographical manifestation of his suffocating shame. It is the most difficult plane to access. The Lord of Outcasts lives in a realm of choking air and ash, where the air is unbreathable due to the dense smog of anguish, betrayal, and broken promises looming over the realm like a pall. Vaporous creatures lurk in palaces of smoke. It's more of a prison than a home, which befits an imprisoned ethereal spirit like Trinomac. Yet, there are glimpses of Malacath's old self in the Ash Pit. The Ashen Forge at the heart of the realm provides a revelrous afterlife for the orcs who worshipped him in life. And two of the only known visitors to the realm spoke of a secluded garden, so out of place in such a dreary world. Around them rose a garden of slender trees, and wound about the trunks were vines festooned with lily-like flowers. A multitude of spheres moved, deep in the colourless sky, as distant and pale as moons. Atribus heard birds chirping, but it was a doleful sound, as if something with a vague memory of having been a bird was trying to reproduce sounds it no longer felt. Malacath appears to feel some sort of sadness towards this locale, reproducing it in his realm. He describes it as a shadow of a garden, this echo of something that once was. Doubtless, this is the one fragment of Trinomac's ethereal glory that endures in a sea of soot and shame. These connections between prince and plain can be found in every one of the Daedra lords. There's Molag Baal's befouled imitation of Tamriel, which could be nothing more than a repugnant replica, or possibly the salvaged remnants of the lost land of Lig. There's Azura's moonshadow, which is so overwhelmingly beautiful that it blinds its visitors, just like her smothering need for love and loyalty. She's vain and demanding, a devouring mother, ruling over a realm too perfect to properly appreciate. The list goes on, and all will be spoken about individually in great detail, because a Daedrologist's quest for understanding never ends. But as I am writing this from Sheogorath's Shivering Isles, I'd like to focus on the way his unique mind materializes in the madhouse. Unlike most Daedric planes, we have quite a lot of information about the nature of the Shivering Isles. This is in part due to Sheogorath's inclination to invite mortals into his realm. While most princes are content with the company of lesser Daedra, and perhaps their most devoted mortal worshippers, the Prince of Madness is such an enthusiastic host that he wishes to accommodate as many people as he possibly can. There's no shortage of real estate in the mind of a god after all. And if you happen to think you aren't mad enough to fit in the asylum, just give it some time. He is sometimes called the Comforter of Men, even Uncle Sheo. You can live rent-free in Sheogorath's head for eternity. What's not to love about that? Some mortals will go to great lengths for immortality, becoming soulless liches, or contracting vampirism, being enslaved by the tyranny of the sun and the unquenchable thirst for blood. Why go through that rigmarole when Sheogorath will welcome you with open arms? Misery loves company, but harbouring so many mortals is bound to have its drawbacks, especially when neurodivergence is a preference. They are considerably more unpredictable than lesser Daedra, for their souls hold something ethereal that the Daedra cannot touch. A couple of examples of these invited individuals include Relmina Verenim, the eccentric mage best known for her avant-garde new form of elemental magic, Flesh. Her macabre studies led the Mages Guild to expel her, and this piqued the Mad God's interest. Another is the champion of Cyrodiil, who doesn't seem insane at first glance, but rumour has it that this hero lacked all autonomy and was controlled by a weirdo inside their head. I think you know what weirdo I'm referring to. Sheogorath's willingness to welcome so many mad mortal strangers has repeatedly backfired, to the point of sacrifice and sedition. All across the Isles, rogue groups of heretics live in open opposition of the very prince who rules the realm. High upon the peaks of the Jester's Spine Mountains, there lies the ruin of Fane, within which heretics gather around a deep hollow. This tunnel descends into the mountain, and is called the Pit of Fane. The heretics of Fane believe that an eldritch tentacled deity named Gyub dwells at the bottom of the pit, and hungers for mortal sacrifice. Rituals involve kneeling before the hole, and intoning the following prayer. Praise be to Gyub, Lord of the Pit. Hear us, warbling Redeemer. Hail the rebirth approaching. Praise be to Gyub, Lord of the Pit. Please accept our offering, merciful one. Extend your tentacles and accept this gift. Bless us, embryonic prince. May this offering satisfy your infinite maw. The offering is then escorted to the precipice. Please accept our offering, O merciful one. Feed and grow now, our prince. Arise and devour oblivion hence. May this offering sate your growing bulk. The congregation then swing the volunteer back and forth over the pit like a meaty pendulum. They stomp their feet as the oscillating intensifies. Praise be to Gyub, praise be to Gyub, praise be to Gyub. And then, at the height of the swing, the lucky one's wrists and ankles are released, and they plummet into the pit. Little is known of Gyub beyond this mortal ritual, but these are actually some of the most harmless of the heretics in the Isles. The followers of Arden Sul posed a very real threat to Sheogorath's sovereignty. A text titled Heretical Thoughts gives us an insight into the beliefs of these dissidents. It is not heresy to speak truth. It is not heresy to speak out against an unjust lord. It is not heresy to take arms and action in defense of true belief. We are the so-called heretics of the Shivering Isles, but we do not speak heresy. We speak the truth. Our Lord Sheogorath is but a man. He is only flesh and blood, not a god, and certainly not a Daedric Prince. There are no princes in the realms of the Daedra, only vile servitors such as the hungers that we summon to do our bidding. Sheogorath the False is a mad despot. Years of dabbling in foul magic and consorting with Daedra have driven him mad. He is not a fit ruler, let alone divine. He perverts the teachings of Arden Sul, he who gave his heart's blood. When the truth of our cause is common knowledge among the people, we will drive him from New Sheoth and put that cesspool to the sword. His 4 limbs will be scattered to the 4 winds. His head will rest upon the hill of suicides, and his heart shall be burnt in the flames of freedom. His entrails shall be fed to the dogs. We will make all the people of the Shivering Isles wear the robes of the heretics. By these robes we know each other to be true non-believers. The people shall return to the wilderness and live among the wild things, as we do. They will see the wisdom and purity of the life we lead, and they will hail us as saviours. Only in the Shivering Isles could the subjects of the realm's lord decry them as an impostor. Calling Sheogorath a mad despot is accurate, but suggesting he isn't even a Daedric Prince, just a man of flesh and blood, is the kind of slander that the mad god could easily punish. Shockingly though, it wouldn't surprise me if the demented side of Sheogorath saw these criticisms and was inclined to believe them, crippled by self-doubt, allowing his critics to castigate him. And the heretics are only one half of the asylum's staunch Sheo hater community. In Dementia, the zealots are slightly less defamatory, choosing to believe that Arden Sul was the mortal incarnation of Sheogorath, as opposed to being a separate, superior leader. But who is this Arden Sul figure? Arden Sul once lived in the Isles and was known as the Prophet. He preached his gospel from the majestic Sakhalem Arden Sul, but little is truly known of what it is he preached. As with all things related to Sheogorath and the Madhouse, there is a split down the middle over fundamental aspects of Arden Sul. The Manics believe he was blinded by the grand enlightenment in the spot where the Sakhalem stands. The Demented believe that this was where he endured the 100-day torture. Both groups also have different stories of Arden Sul's death. The Manic version involves a night of superlative revelry, fueled by spirits and copious quantities of green moat. Arden Sul and his 213 followers engaged in a veritable orgy of merrymaking and overindulgence, a night fraught with a profusion of singing, dancing and fornicating. As the celebration reached a crescendo and the event reached its whirlwind apex, one by one, Arden Sul's followers began to drop to the ground, their lifeblood draining from their bodies until the ground was soaked a crimson red. The excesses of their hedonism had taken its toll and had caused their very hearts to explode. Although details are uncertain, it was said Arden Sul was the last to die, with the look of pure bliss upon his face. The Demented, on the other hand, claim Arden Sul was in the midst of weeding out a traitor when he met his doom. After imbibing the wine Arden Sul gave them, his followers suddenly felt themselves paralysed. Aware of their surroundings but unable to move. Then, one by one, Arden Sul cut out the still-beating hearts of his followers and read their lifeblood. After removing all 213 hearts, he still hadn't located the traitor. Furious, he reached into his chest and tore out his own heart. Before the light faded from his eyes, Arden Sul was reported to have realized the ironic truth. He was the traitor, destined to kill himself. Now, what I find fascinating about Arden Sul is that he seems to represent the duality of Sheogorath and of Lorkhan. The monomyth tells of Lorkhan's fate. Finally, Trinimac, Auriel's greatest knight, knocked Lorkhan down in front of his army and reached in with more than hands to take his heart. He was undone. The men dragged Lorkhan's body away and swore blood vengeance on the heirs of Auriel for all time. But when Trinimac and Auriel tried to destroy the heart of Lorkhan, it laughed at them. It said, "This heart is the heart of the world, for one was made to satisfy the other." Both of Arden Sul's deaths relate to the story of Lorkhan's sundering. In the manic version, Arden Sul died with a look of bliss upon his face, despite the great gaping Siphish-shaped hole in his chest. And in the demented version, Arden Sul's heart is literally ripped free as a punishment for being a traitor. If you ask the Aedra to describe Lorkhan in a word, traitor would likely be their choice. These stories also tie in with Sheogorath. If you saw my video on Jyggalag, you may recall that I suggested both spirits were born in the same instant, and it was atop Tower Zero at convention. Varieties of Faith in the Empire states that Sheogorath is born when Lorkhan's divine spark is removed. One crucial myth calls him the Siphish-shaped hole of the world. Is Arden Sul just a folktale in the Asylum, a name given to the creation story of the Plains Lord? If he truly did live, then perhaps he came to the Isles under the same pretext as the champion of Cyrodiil, or Haskill before him. In my Jyggalag video, I asserted that Jyggalag, along with all of Sheogorath's Mantillers, however many there may be beyond Haskill and the champion, are all merely voices in Mad Uncle Sheo's mind. Maybe Arden Sul is just another of these. It makes sense. If you think about it, surely the champion of Cyrodiil's deeds in the Shivering Isles will cause some of the realm's inhabitants to worship him, or start a cult devoted to him. Some heretics may even suggest that he is the true ruler, but like all the others, he was sucked into the hungry echo chamber within Sheogorath's skull. The Isles are rife with heretics, zealots, even knights of order. The realm is plagued with contradiction, and if Sheogorath is the divine manifestation of contradiction, then it's no wonder the Isles appear as they do. I mentioned Jyggalag, and he's the perfect example of this prince-plain relationship. Whether you believe Jyggalag is just another side of Sheo, or a separate entity altogether, it's quintessential to the Mad God's character to be constantly undermined within his own realm, by himself of all people. He demolishes his own home, only to sit shamefully among the debris, before rebuilding it all over again. It's madness. So, as I continue my pilgrimage across the plain, meandering back and forth between radiant mania and gloomy dementia, I can see Sheogorath in all his contradictory glory in all things. I see it in the plant life. I see it in the golden saints and the dark seducers. I see it in the monstrous mantis-like elytra and the hideous hungers. My walk concluded at the Hill of Suicides, where I sat to rest my weary legs. Here the spirits of mortal inhabitants who chose to end their lives dwell in sleepless perpetuity. Of every landmark in Sheogorath's realm, this is the one that perplexes me. The Mad God coaxes 6 souls into his asylum, and he refuses to let them leave. He traps their bodies, but also their souls. And while I will wait until my meeting with Sheogorath to talk in great detail about his personality, this strikes me as particularly cruel. I think we all know that beneath the whimsical cheese connoisseur, there is a deeply disturbed god, hiding his dementia between a tangled masquerade of eccentricities. Some Daedric princes would predictably choose to punish these weak mortals, considering their total surrender a form of cowardice. But Sheogorath has faced depression. It lives within the dark recesses of his psyche. and yet he refuses to allow his mortal subjects to find peace. Perhaps it's because Sheogorath cannot die. He can tear down the walls of his realm, but it will always be rebuilt. He can allow others to mantle him, but they will only add to the crazed cacophony within his head. When a Daedra is killed, it reforms from chaotic creation and rises again from the Waters of Oblivion. The mortal inhabitants of the Isles may be Sheogorath's inferior subjects, but they possess an Anuic animus, a soul, something the prince will never have, and he envies them for it. His spite keeps the souls of the dead at the Hill of Suicides, denying them their blissful ascent to Aetherius. If he cannot die on that hill, why should his subjects be able to? When the original spirits took their shapes and began to understand their natures and limitations, they solidified into existence. I don't doubt that there is a part of Sheogorath that regrets existing, that wishes he could have stayed formless. A mortal existential crisis generally revolves around the realization that we will one day inevitably die. An immortal existential crisis, however, is the exact opposite, for immortals cannot die. If you are the mad god, and dealing with severe mental illness is intrinsic to your very existence, well, that's a form of suffering I cannot even begin to comprehend. I'll say no more about Sheogorath, as I expect Haskell will be arranging our meeting very soon. But I hope you leave here with a better understanding of what a plane of oblivion is, both physically and spiritually. Thank you so much for coming with me on this journey, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you're new to the channel, consider subscribing, and if you liked what you saw, give it a like. If you want to support the channel further, I'll leave a link to my Patreon in the description, but please, only pledge if you can comfortably afford to. Thanks again. My name is Drew the Daedrologist. You've been watching Drew Mora, and I'll see you in the next one.